What's up, guys? So it's been a couple weeks since my last video, mostly just because of a lot of ongoing lockdown related mental health stuff and other life stuff, which I'm sure most people these days can probably relate to. We've been in some kind of lockdown or stay at home order for basically 6 months here, and I've definitely been feeling it mentally. So I figured I'd ease back into things just by turning my attention back to the r/fantasy subreddit and the voting thread that should still be currently going on, I think, up until Tuesday, May 25th, if I'm not mistaken. And that voting thread is the annual top novels voting thread. Every year, the subreddit, for those that don't know, does a big thread where people can vote for their current top 10 favorite speculative fiction books, regardless of what the publication date is. It could be fantasy, it could be sci-fi, horror, any other speculative fiction. But of course, since it is mostly a fantasy sub at its core, as you can imagine, the results are usually pretty fantasy heavy. Individual books from series are counted towards that series to simplify things. So if you vote for, Assassin's Apprentice, it'll be counted towards Realm of the Elderlings or something like that. But yeah, it's completely fan-generated, community-generated, so it's not just about professionals and big names scratching each other's backs or voting for each other, voting for where the money's at or anything like that. It's all about books that are most loved by the community, which I think is great. What I thought I would do for this video is just to share the books in series I voted for here with you. I notice that my lists are often kind of skewed a bit more towards favorites that I've read within the last decade. Not all, but definitely most of them, or many of them for sure. But what can you do as well when you've only got the 10 available slots for voting? So anyways, here is my list. I'm kind of ranking them for the purpose of this video, but it's not really set in stone for me. So first on the list is The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold. I absolutely love this book. The other two books in the World of the Five Gods series were good too, especially Paladin of Souls, but personally Curse of Chalion was just perfect for me, not to mention that Kaz, who is the main character, is easily one of my favorite main characters of all time. For those that haven't read it, this is high fantasy taking place in a world based on medieval Iberia. I really loved McMaster Bujold's prose and loved the kind of dark Shakespearean vibes and humor in Curse of Chalion, whereas in Paladin of Souls, especially in the opening chapters, you really noticed that it was giving off really strong Canterbury Tales vibes. There are curses, magic, demons, all sorts of awesome stuff. This might actually be my current favorite fantasy book, even though I don't own it right now. A good friend of mine actually lent it to me a few years ago, and I haven't got around to buying my own copy yet. But thank you very much to her for sharing such an amazing book with me, because I really fell in love with Curse of Chalion. The second book on my list was The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, and this is a 16-book high fantasy series divided into 5 mini-series, taking place mostly in 3 different regions of this world, although they kind of wander into others too. And it also follows 3-ish different storylines, but they are all tied together in the end. My favorite main subseries of this larger series is definitely the Fitz books. Fitz Farseer is another one of my favorite characters of all time. I find him very relatable, and I just really adored being in his head for 9, often very lengthy books. So I just wanted to add a bit of a note here. The first thing is that the Fitz books in particular are very character driven, and in most cases slower paced. The first book, which is Assassin's Apprentice, begins with Fitz as a young child, and he's about 6 years old in the very beginning. We see him grow older throughout the books, which kind of span almost the entirety of his life from about 6 years old until he's in his 60s, I believe. The story at the end of the Farseer subseries might seem like the conclusion to you at first when you're reading that trilogy, but I assure you it is not the end, it is not the conclusion. There is so much more left to the story that begins with the Farseer books, and they also trickle their way into the Live Ship Traders and Rainwild's books too. So for that reason, I would highly recommend reading these in order of publication, which means Farseer trilogy, Live Ship Traders, Tawny Man trilogy, Rainwild's Chronicles, and the Fitz and the Fool. Because the characters and stories do have some crossover and overlap and are all really relevant to kind of like the final conclusion and also to each other. Like, you do see character crossovers, you do kind of see small things happening in various storylines that you wouldn't know if you didn't read it in chronological order or went on the internet, I guess, and spoiled yourself. But why would you want to do that? Anyway, so that was The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. My third pick was the Trickster trilogy by Eden Robinson, which should actually be my next video after this one. This series could be called Magical Realism, it could be called Low Fantasy, it could be called Slice of Life. The second and third books could also be called Urban Fantasy, since they take place, for the most part, in a city. So yeah, they could be called a lot of things, all that to say. But they are set in our world in the 2010s, following the main character whose name is Jared. The first book of the series starts off with very, very few supernatural elements, and I think that kind of throws some people off. The second and third books, though, are much heavier on the supernatural. There are ghosts, there are interdimensional beings, there are shapeshifters, and all sorts of other similar beings and creatures involved. I'll be posting a full video on that soon, though, so probably in the next few days, so I'll probably leave it there for now. I will say, though, that Jared has become also one of my favorite characters that I've read in fiction. So number 4 is the Earthseed duology by Octavia Butler, and this is not actually fantasy, but more so apocalyptic and dystopian fiction. I actually talk a fair bit about this book in my underrated apocalyptic fiction video, which I think you should see the link up above. If not, I'm also going to be adding it in the description. This book takes place in the United States, mostly during the 2020s, although it was written in the early 90s. And it's also predominantly single POV. The main character's name is Lauren Olamina. Can't talk today, and she is trying to transform and build community during a time of collapse and crisis. This deals with climate change, it deals with American presidential politics, race and class issues, and many, many other themes as well. Anyone who's familiar with Butler will know that it's there's lots going on in her books. But yeah, Octavia Butler is awesome, underrated, and I definitely recommend these two books, which are part of a series, so hence why I was able to vote for the duology in this voting thread. Number 5 on my list was Doomsday Book by Connie Willis. I first read this book in the mid-2000s, but it's a book that continues to really stick with me to this day, and I feel like I definitely need to reread it. I can still clearly remember how hard it hit me emotionally at the time, and that has really kind of stuck with me and left an impression for all these years. This is a standalone novel that blends science fiction and historical fiction, and it's about a medieval studies student named Kivrin, if I remember correctly. And in this alternate future, time travel has been discovered, and it's starting to be used by historians as a way of collecting more accurate information from the past. So Kivrin, if I'm remembering her name correctly, has been transported back to medieval England, where the Black Plague is slowly beginning to rear its ugly head. I don't want to spoil too much about this because it's an awesome book. I really recommend it. But for me, this was also an absolutely devastating read at the time, and I highly recommend it if you are looking for an emotional read. So number 6 is the Dagger and Coin series by Daniel Abraham. This is a great epic high fantasy series, and it's set in a world that is home to, if I'm remembering correctly, 12 human subspecies, or kind of anthropomorphic subspecies, and these species are definitely not your traditional dwarves and elves and orcs and that kind of thing. You've got regular humans who are considered first blood and who are the oldest, which is kind of contrary to what you often see in fantasy. But then you've got subspecies like the Timzanai, who have kind of like insect-like characteristics, or you have another example is the Kortadam, that I remember having, for some reason I remember them as like otter-like beings, I think because of the way like the full pelts were described, and I feel like there must have been something about otters in there, because that's really what stuck with me about them. The series deals heavily with topics like religious fanaticism, genocide, eugenics, and court politics. but I think it's really well done. I don't think it's done in what I consider at least to be a cliche way. I just think it was a really strong series. I would say this series is probably best known for the strength of its main characters and of its main villain as well. And one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character, like I said, I can't talk today, I'm sorry, is Clara Callium, she's a middle-aged noblewoman, kind of, I guess, a housewife type of character, and she's chronically underestimated for it. She's invisibilized, but she's also absolutely a heroic character, using others' assumptions about her lack of intelligence or her lack of ability and knowledge of the world as her superpowers in many ways. So she kind of gets to be kind of stealthy in that way. And when it comes to this series, you're more likely to hear people talking about the main villain. I feel like the main villain is the high point for a lot of people. I won't give too much away about that, but I found his transition from being kind of, to me, I thought, a sympathetic underdog guy. Like, he was a bit annoying at first, but still, you could empathize with him. But then he transformed into this total self-entitled monster. But yeah, the way that was done was really well written, I thought, and also very realistic in a lot of ways too. Anyways, before I blabber on too much about that, I'll move on to the next one, which is The Traitor's Son Cycle by Miles Cameron, aka Christian Cameron when he writes historical fiction. So this is another 5-book series. I'm not sure if I mentioned Dagger and Coin is also a 5-book series. But yeah, this is epic high fantasy, and it takes place in a world that's mostly reminiscent of medieval Europe, with very, very clear parallels to medieval France, England, and Scotland, the Italian states, and Greece or Byzantium. It also features regions reminiscent of pre-colonial or early colonial North America and the medieval Middle East. If you like military fantasy or just lots of combat generally, if you like weird monsters and creatures, interesting magic systems, although I will say this isn't a hard magic system by any means, also very multi POV. One of the main selling points for the series is that Cameron writes the best, as far as I'm concerned, most historically accurate combat in medieval-inspired fantasy or historical fiction. He is a medievalist and a very experienced historical reenactor as well, for that matter, has decades of training in medieval European martial arts as well as ancient European martial arts, and so yeah, he really knows his stuff. If you've ever trained in any kind of European medieval martial arts yourself, you will definitely get some Fiore de la Barry flashbacks during the training and footwork sequences. But yeah, this book starts off centered on a mercenary company called the Red Company, led by, predictably, the Red Knight. And in the first book, this mercenary company is hired by a nunnery to deal with what first looks like a wyvern problem. Needless to say, things definitely escalate from there. Number 8 is something that probably most people recognize. It is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Like I said, most people are probably familiar with it, but just in case, this is epic high fantasy as well, and it is very well known for its hard magic system. I originally didn't include Mistborn in my list just because there are so many great books to choose from out there, but at the end of the day, I couldn't, personally in good conscience, leave it off. I really loved this series when I read it, especially for the really tight-knit plot that was perfect for someone like me who is a big mystery lover. There was a lot of great stuff to unravel, and it's rare that an author can totally throw me off, but Sanderson definitely achieved that with the conclusion of Era 1, more specifically. I have read all of the currently available Mistborn books, novellas, and stories, and continue to wait for the last Era 2 book. P.S. Note, Allomancer Jack and the Pits of Eltania is seriously, as far as I'm concerned, an underrated and also really hilarious short story. But yeah, so that was my number 8. Number 9 is The Sentinel Cycle by Malka Older, and so this is switching away again from fantasy. This is very political science fiction set approximately 60-70 years in the future, I think. If you're interested in political thrillers, science fiction, election and campaign politics, definitely, global politics, definitely, then I highly recommend this series to you. Because of her profession, Malka Older is also very well versed in these topics, as well as other areas like disaster relief and crisis management. The basic premise of this trilogy is a future world that is no longer divided into nations and national governments as we know them today. Instead, the world has switched to a political system called a micro-democracy, which divides the world into sentinels. So you've got sentinels of 100,000 people, regardless of land distribution or geography. Each sentinel gets to vote on their preferred political party. One party winds up holding a super democracy, I think it's called, based on the results of the election. But overall, it gives people more of an ability to live in a region that fits with their personal values. Makes it harder to declare war on other sentinels, and there are countless parties to choose from. This is also a very high-tech world, so there is, I think, there are some pretty cool gadgets and concepts that come into play as well. Anyways, I personally love this series, and I thought the conclusion was really, really satisfying, and it also didn't really follow traditional expectations. Like, I finished the first book, Infomocracy, and I was like, wow, I wasn't actually expecting that conclusion, because I think our expectations in these kinds of books are a little bit different. But yeah, I'm also putting a link in the description to a podcast episode called Future of Democracy from Annalee Newitz's new podcast series called Deep Futures. In that episode, she talks to Malka Older about the current state of democracy and imagining new possibilities, which she relates back to her Sentinel Cycle series. So yeah, that is my number 9. Number 10 is Tigana by Guy Gabriel Kay. This is very much a favorite from the days of my youth, as they say. I read this around the mid-2000s and was absolutely obsessed with it at the time. It is high fantasy, and it's a standalone novel, unlike a lot of the other ones that I've mentioned. And it takes place in a world that very closely resembles Renaissance Italy, if I'm remembering correctly. It has been almost 15 years or so-ish since I read this, so bear with me a little bit. The story is mainly about a former kingdom that has been crushed by war and oppressed by its enemies with the intent of wiping it off every map, from every history book, from everybody's memories. That kingdom, of course, as you might imagine, is called Tigana. But people are at this point completely forbidden from even speaking the name Tigana. I also remember that it's a pretty sad book, and there is also, perhaps not relevant to some, I don't know, but there is also delicious blue wine. I remember because my mother had also read this book after I had read it, and we were both very intent on trying to find a blue wine like the one in Tigana. As a side note, never did, but you know, it remains a dream. But yeah, it remains one of my favorite books in my memories, at least, and I should really, really reread it soon to see how well it holds up. I really hope it does, because yeah, it's like Doomsday Book. It's one of those longtime favorites that has really stuck with me. Anyways, those are the top 10 books I voted for in the r/fantasy 2021 top novels poll. If the thread is still open when you see this, I recommend voting. The more the merrier, and anyone can vote as long as they have a Reddit account of some kind. If not, I'm also just going to be linking the relevant thread in the description anyways if you want to take a look at it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.